Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gail Dines, and I'm president of Culture Reframed, the only non-profit that is dedicated to building resilience and resistance in young people to porn culture. So that's who we are. We have many Facebook Lives on our Culture Reframed Facebook page, so please go and have a look at those at some time. I'd also like to tell those listening about our conference on October the 2nd, coming up in now 10 days, which is, I think, the first ever virtual conference, multidisciplinary, that looks at how to teach sex education with a porn critical lens. And we're bringing together speakers from all different fields and also different countries, Sweden, Turkey, the UK, the US. And so please go on our website, Culture Reframed, and right there you can click on to the conference details and agenda and registration. Let us know where you're viewing from. Put it into the comments who you are and where you're viewing from, or if you don't want to say who you are, just say where you are. And remember, we invite also questions from you. So it is my great pleasure to introduce a dear friend of mine, Byron Hurt. Now, Byron is a filmmaker, and many of you probably know him from his wonderful film Beyond Beats and Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. I've known Byron for many years, and we're going to talk about when we first met. So, Byron, good to see you.
Hey, Gail, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's always great to see you, Byron. I have to say.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. I really appreciate it. I'm humbled by it.
Oh, thank you so much, Byron. And Byron, I have schlepped you so many times to Boston when I was at Wheelock to lecture, and you were always so gracious. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we've known each other for what, over 25 years now.
A long time. Yeah, I was a young kid, basically coming out of college.
Yeah, and I had a young kid, so. And I think we met through Jackson Katz actually at one of his birthday parties.
We did. Yeah.
We won't talk about how old he was then, right?
Many years ago, yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's wonderful to see you, and you know, you've done such great work, and I've seen you evolve as a filmmaker and a critic just over these 25 years. But let's go back to when we sort of really first worked together, when you did that great film, I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America. And if people haven't seen it, I definitely suggest you get to see it. Now, I know you cringe a bit, Byron, and you can talk about why, but I still think it is probably the only film out there that I've seen that really explains what it means to be a Black man in the United States of America with such a long and ugly history of racism. And not only do you do it as a filmmaker with a critical analysis, you also bring your own personal story into that. So my first question to you would be, what made you make that as your first film? What led you to it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for saying such kind things about the film. You know, it was my first quote unquote professional, you know, documentary film. And, you know, I was really inspired by a filmmaker named Marlon Riggs, you know, who was questioning race and gender and sexuality in his films. And I was really, I would say, influenced by his work, by his honesty, by his courage. Marlon Riggs was a gay Black man from the Bay Area, you know, who made a series of films. And, you know, his work really transformed me around race and gender. You know, prior to being exposed to his work, you know, my lens, I guess my worldview was through the lens of a Black male, right? A young Black man who experienced racism, who was a child of, you know, two parents who grew up in the Jim Crow South. So I saw the world through the prism of race primarily. But it was Marlon Riggs who, you know, helped to sort of challenge me and push me to think beyond race and to start thinking a little bit more about gender. And there were other people, but as a filmmaker, you know, his work was so powerful that I decided that I wanted to make films because I wanted to have that kind of impact, you know, on young people.
I felt also I mean, I used to show his early works in my classes, and I have to say his films were transformative for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then when I graduated from school, you know, I met this guy named Jackson Katz, and you know, Jackson was a very interesting person, very interesting character, but you know, had a deep knowledge around both race and gender and class, and really, you know, challenged me to think deeply about the culture of masculinity that I grew up in, that I was a part of, that was in the air that I breathe all around me. And you know, through my relationship with Jackson and the work that we did together with the MVP program, traveling around at first, you know, New England, talking about masculinity and sexism and homophobia and all of these different issues, and then taking that around the country and having these really intense, talks about the culture of manhood, how our sexism impacts girls and women. Talking about the roots of male violence toward girls and women. That also had a real deep impact on me. And I remember Jackson, saying I think we were somewhere, maybe it was Japan. We were working with the Marines in Japan, and Jackson and I had a conversation about how we could have a bigger influence beyond just having classroom discussions with boys and men. And I challenged him to write his book, because he had been talking about writing a book for many years about masculinity, and he challenged me to interrogate masculinity through film, and that's how I decided to make I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America. It was through my growth and my evolution, working with Jackson and the MVP program.
Yeah, no, and it certainly comes through in there, your sort of evolution. But I have to say, it was so good. And I know you've changed and you think you a lot, which you have, but you still had that great analysis in that film. It was still.
It's interesting that you say that, because, I always think that my analysis can be and could be sharper. I was a young guy at that time, and I was really what I really wanted to do was to get Black boys and men to start thinking much more deeply about our socialization process as boys and as men, but within the larger context of white supremacy, white patriarchy. And so, having that analysis rooted from that, in that place, situated in white supremacy, and how that impacts us as Black men, while at the same time, sort of nudging us from a place of love to grow, to evolve, to challenge our own sexism, as I have been challenging my own sexism and my own misogyny and my own homophobia. Later, I developed a deeper analysis about transphobia as well. So, we're always learning and growing and, expanding upon what we've done. Yeah,
you had that root there. It was there. I mean, you could see it. And of course, all of us, we grow and we develop, and a lot of time we grow and develop because of each other.
That's true. And I want to say this, Gail, you have been very instrumental in my growth, in my evolution.
Oh, that's an honor. That's an honor.
There's no question about that. And I included you in my film, I Am a Man, because you had an analysis about the images and the representations of Black men and Black masculinity. I thought was really insightful, and I continue to support you in your work and your analysis about porn culture, because it's very important.
Yeah, thank you.
Your voice is very important.
Thank you, Byron, for saying that. I almost called you Jackson. I'm sorry. You see, confused in my head. Thank you. So let's move in then to the film that really kind of catapulted you into the public arena, which is Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. Now, I must have seen that almost as much as you, because I get taught it in every class I ever did. And I know that you said one time, you and I were somewhere and it was showing, and you said, I just can't watch it again. Go back to the discussion, because you watch it. But each time I watch it, I see something new in there, because it's so full. It's so full. So first of all, let's talk about your experience of making that. I mean, because going to Florida, speaking to some of the Black hip hoppers, with compassion, but also with critique. You did that as well. And so I'm interested, first of all, from a personal perspective, how was it? Because all of us who do this work, we're affected by this work on some profound level. So first talk about that. What was it like making it?
Well, it was a challenge to make it, because I was still learning how to be a filmmaker, how to make a film. So, the process of making the film was difficult, but from a content perspective, I really wanted to make something that felt seminal, or that felt comprehensive in the approach, and all of the different topics that we covered in the film. From an emotional standpoint, I remember feeling deeply afraid that you know, I may be somewhat rejected by Black people who love hip hop, because, you know, there was an analysis around the misogyny and the homophobia. And so I was deeply concerned, you know, that, you know, I may be rejected, you know, by the culture that I love, you know, based on the analysis of the film. So I just remember, you know, wanting to make a film that was good enough, that was strong enough, that would be able to feel as though this was like almost like a love letter to the hip hop community, the hip hop generation, and that was coming from a place of love, but also again challenging us to think deeply, not just about the music itself, but about the corporatization of the music. You know how big corporations and basically white men were profiting on, you know, the images, the representations of Black men, but also Black girls and Black women in terms of the hypersexualization of girls and women in a way that, you know, was deeply problematic. So, you know, how did I feel making that film? I mean, I was very conflicted throughout making the film because I wanted to, I didn't want to denigrate Black men or Black masculinity. And so I remember working really hard to try and make sure that we put everything into a much larger social context, which was very, very challenging to do, very deep, very hard to do, you know. And I remember, well, there are two things that really stand out to me about that film. Even though I really worked hard to try and root the film within the context of white patriarchy, you know, white corporate structures and that kind of thing. It was very challenging to get people who were non-Black, right, who were not within the hip hop community, from. It was hard to get people to prevent people from scapegoating hip hop music as if hip hop was the source of sexism and the source of misogyny and the root of, you know, homophobia, right? And because all they see on the screen are images of Black rappers, you know, who are reciting lyrics that are deeply misogynistic and so on and so forth. And so in a way, it kind of gave, you know, white men and white boys a pass in terms of their own sexism and their own misogyny. And so that's something I wanted to prevent. And I remember you saying to me that no matter how I tried to root it in a larger context, that the images, the representations of Black people on the screen were so pervasive that it was going to be difficult for people to see beyond that.
I remember that discussion well.
Yeah. Do you remember that?
I remember us having discussions. I remember one of the things we talked about, and we said, would it make more sense to bring the end to the beginning and start with the white guys who own it and then frame it in that? Because I remember we were going back and forth, because my fear, and it still happened when I was teaching it in class, again, was my white students would feel like they got a pass.
Yeah.
And everything was, you know, because everything is always put on the shoulders of African Americans. Anything that's wrong with the United States goes on the shoulders of African Americans.
Yeah.
And my fear was, and I would have I'd have about 2/3 white, a third of color in my class. And I would always do a lot beforehand to make sure they came into the film understanding. And I would often do classes on white rappers like Eminem beforehand. Because nobody talks about people like Eminem, who are like 20 times worse than that. You know, he talks about killing his wife in front of his kid. I mean, for God's sake, it doesn't get any worse.
And his mom. I mean, he speaks about his mom in very, you know, deplorable ways. But I mean, that's, you know, that's in his previous music. I don't know if he still does that today, but you know, at that time, yes, you're right about that.
And he should never get a pass even later on for what he did with that. I mean, and his hateful stuff. But I felt, though, after, you know, that you did achieve that. But again, that was, you know, I was teaching about race. I wonder what happens to white teachers who don't feel fully prepared and are in an all-white classroom. I mean, you're up against the most compelling of images, and sometimes a rational discourse just bypasses those images.
Yeah. So that was a powerful lesson for me. I mean, you know, but I mean, I'm a Black male who, you know, who cares very deeply about Black people. And I want us to grow and I want us to evolve, you know, and I don't just care about Black men. I care about Black women as well, you know, and I don't just care about heterosexual Black people. I care about, the members from the LGBTQ community who are Black as well, Black and brown as well. So, I think it's important to have a very nuanced discussion about identity, about race, about gender, about sex, about sexuality, in ways that forces us to grow, that pushes us to grow,
And I think that comes out in the film. Absolutely. I think you did a fabulous job of that. And I thought that interview with the white hip hop guy, when he says "you people."
Yeah.
Oh my God! I mean,
I couldn't pay for that. I couldn't have casted that. And,
did you pay him to do that?
I did not. No, I know. Yeah, but we did not pay him. We just happened to stumble across him, and it was just one of those moments. You know what I mean? And it's one of those memorable moments in the film. But that scene in Daytona was also a memorable scene. I remember that very, very distinctly. I remember just how wild it was in terms of the just complete debasement of young women who were on that street on that day, right? And we're talking about Daytona Beach, spring break. And, it was almost as if it was a playground, for the men to sexually assault, the women right in the public, right in view of public view of police officers in the full light of day. I mean, it was a tremendous scene that happens often, it was not an anomaly, and it's not exclusive to, Black people and spring break. In fact, there were many, Black men who I spoke to on the street who said that they were borrowing from what they saw at white spring breaks on MTV, right? Because MTV used to broadcast, the spring break every spring. And so, it was very clear that there was a certain level of male privilege that Black men were borrowing from, right? And it was all in the service, right? I mean, the way they were treated, the way that they viewed the Black women there at Daytona was as if these Black women were there at the service of Black men. And even the white police officers were in cahoots with that.
That was very clear.
Even the white police officers co-signed it. They gave it
when you went up to them and they were drinking coffee. There's about 8 of them, and you asked them, and they said, "No, it's just a quiet night tonight." Meanwhile, 2 feet away, these women are being sexually assaulted.
2 feet away, literally 2 feet away, and it was happening over and over again, to the point where my sound person, who's really really nice guy, really good guy, we sat down to take a break at one point, and he said, "Can we just go home? Can we leave now?" It was that. It was that disheartening. I mean, and he was a guy who, was sensitized to it somehow. But, most of the guys there, unfortunately, really didn't challenge the level of, misogyny and misogynoir that was taking place at that scene.
Well, if you want to see what goes on a spring break for whites, watch the film Liberated on Netflix. Because actually that's made by a group of filmmakers, and they went down to spring break, and they actually, it's 20 times worse than what you've got. And they actually caught a rape on there. They inadvertently filmed a rape that was going on. Yes.
Wow. Liberated? I never heard of this, Gail.
It's on Netflix, and it's a fascinating film about, and it really shows what goes on in white spring break. And by the way, Girls Gone Wild.
Yeah.
Used to go to, never once had a Black female in, which is good. But it's also bad that he was, exploiting women. But I saw a scene. I was an expert witness in a case against Girls Gone Wild, so I got to see a lot of Girls Gone Wild tapes. And this is Joe Francis, and there was a scene that I saw that I'll never leave my head. So you got 3 young women, 2 white and Black, and the cameramen are there, and of course they're all shouting "Girls Gone Wild, this is great." And the African-American girl joins in, and then the 2 white girls start making out with each other, which is, of course, the Girls Gone Wild theme. And the Black girl suddenly realizes they don't want her. And she's frozen. She stands frozen as the camera is on her 2 white friends making out. And slowly the camera moves away from her to get her out the scene. It was so clear You know, this is for white boys watching white girls doing this. And luckily for the African American girl, it's glad that she was cast out, because of the implication. Being in Girls Gone Wild was not a ticket to Hollywood, believe me. It was a ticket to disaster. So, you know, there is a lot of that going on. So I wanted to ask you about porn culture and the way you think about it and race, because I do remember that time where we were in Boston and we went to a porn shop, because I think I was making a film with somebody else. And we decided to go, and we were talking about racism in porn. And I think you lasted all of 5 minutes in that shop. You said to me, I think I'm going to be sick. I'm going to throw up. I have to go out. And you walked out. And I remember that deep reaction in your body that you just couldn't stand it. And I thought, you know, wish all men felt that way. They couldn't take more than 5 minutes in a porn shop. And so I take it, you know, as well from your filmmaking and everything, that definitely misogyny is something, you know, very, very close to your politics. And also now that you have a daughter, I mean, it must take on a much greater level when it's so personal, where the person you love most in the world, you can see at risk in this patriarchal society.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's interesting that you have that memory of me in that moment. I think I may have hit delete in terms of that particular memory. I do remember going to the porn shops with you. I do remember you asking me to accompany you, and that you were doing research. And I don't know if it was for a book that you were working on, or for your slideshow presentation, or just to keep yourself current with what was out there. And there were a lot of things that I took away from that experience. One thing that I remember is that you said that you know, that there were no windows in porn shops, right? That they were built in such a way where there were no windows. You couldn't see.
I forgot that. Yeah,
I remember that. And I just remember the experience being, you know, very uncomfortable for me, you know, at that time. I don't think that I had ever been I don't believe that I had ever been in a porn shop with anyone before. Definitely not with a woman. Definitely not with a white woman, you know, who was doing research on porn. But I can tell you that it was definitely an eye-opening experience for me in terms of like your analysis of the covers and the ways in which Black men were presented in porn, the ways in which Black women were presented in porn, and how they're all based on these very, you know, long-held stereotypes and tropes about Black masculinity, about Black femininity, the way in which, you know, Black women are completely dehumanized, right? Even more so than white women, right? And seen as closer to nature, almost animalistic. Really over sexualized desires or over sexualized appetites. It was definitely a big learning experience for me. You know, and I think, you know, just that experience, you know, attending a couple of your lectures, you know, your slideshow presentations where you deconstruct the images in porn culture. I mean, I think every man needs to be a part of that, you know, and I know not every man is open or receptive to critiques on porn culture, because it basically challenges their privilege, right? It challenges their pleasure, you know, their I guess their the belief, you know, that you are interrupting, you know, their own personal privilege and own personal pleasure by viewing and watching porn. But I think it's important for men to be able to develop this analysis and to critique not just, you know, the actual debasement of girls and women in porn, but how these huge corporations profit, right, and make billions of dollars off of these fetishes and these fantasies and these real highly misogynistic and even violent ideas about women and sexuality.
No, and actually there's one company now, and interestingly it's kind of dissolved into one major company in the porn industry called 9Geek. They're kind of the Walmart or Amazon of pornography today.
Yeah.
And certainly, you know, the stuff I've seen in porn and race. I mean, you know, what's so interesting is that a lot of, you know, progressive people who have great race politics, it stops when it gets to porn.
Yeah.
It's like their brains drop out of their head, you know, things they wouldn't, you know. I'll give you an example. One of the top selling porn videos, well, not videos now, live streaming, is called "Oh No, There's a Negro in My," and then it's daughter, mother, sister. And these are sold like crazy. And, you know, the progressives would never support a sitcom that says, oh, no, there's a Negro in my suburb. Who would allow that? And yet porn gets a pass for a level of racism that no other media genre would get, and gets a pass from progressives for a level of racism that they would never give a pass for anything else. So it seems that somehow pornography fits in this area where everything you thought about politically just falls out of your head, because it's fun and it's sex, rather than being seen for what it is, which is sexual exploitation.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to those voices. You know, that's not my way of looking at it. You know, I have a problem with that, just as I would a sitcom.
Many white men. I'm talking about white men now, mainly.
You white? Say it again.
Mainly white men who are progressive.
Oh,
who support it, not people of color. Yeah.
Well, I mean, either way, I mean, I mean, that's just not the way that I view it.
Cool.
But I think it really comes down to, again, people feeling as if porn is acceptable. I can't speak to those voices. You know what I'm saying? Like, because even coming up with a rationale for it doesn't even make sense.
No, I agree.
Rationalize it. You know what I'm saying?
No, I agree. It's not worth pondering on them. I'm more interested in your work. So, first of all, I can't see any questions. Are people writing questions? I don't see any in the chat. So feel free to go into asking questions. So tell us about your latest work, where you're going with this now, because I've been seeing posts on your Facebook. So
my latest film is called Hazing, and we're finishing up on the film. We're very, very, very close to being finished with the film. And it's going to air nationally on PBS, hopefully, God willing, in 2022. There is no air date right now, but it looks like it's going to be 2022. And basically, I mean, if the film is deeply personal, it's probably one of my most personal documentary films. It's the most sobering film that I've made to date. And it explores the impact that hazing culture has on young people around the country, not just in Greek life but outside of Greek life as well. And its connection to masculinity and the ways in which girls and women experience hazing culture as well. So I mean, it's you have to see it in order to form your own opinion of the documentary. It's taken me quite a while to get this film done. But we're close to getting it done, and I hope that it has a big impact. Yeah, when people see.
I think linking to that is that hazing, pornography is a form of hazing for young boys.
Talk to me.
Well, in that way, because what happens when you go on the porn site is they say things like, "Are you man enough for this?" Or "Can you stand this? This is for real men?" So I think what they're doing is they're attracting younger boys who normally wouldn't be able to stand it because it's so violent. And by saying, "Are you man enough for this?" what 14-year-old boy is going to say, "No, I'm not"? So I think it's
definitely appealing to their sense of manhood. Well, I mean, it's definitely sort of taking advantage of their vulnerability in terms of their level of security around their manhood and their sense of masculinity. Yes, definitely.
And it's a rite of passage into manhood. And they're testing them out to see, can you manage this rite of passage? You can see how they're kind of reeling them in through this. And I mean, I would see, would you agree or disagree that it's a kind of hazing into masculinity?
I mean, I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, and I know that, we've had this conversation, before. I mean, I think, boys, I definitely think it's a rite of passage of sorts. So yes, I mean, I would agree with that statement. Yes.
Yeah. So this is great that you've got another film in the works. I'm sure that people will be dying to see it. Great that it's going on PBS and all of that. They're really looking forward to it. And unfortunately, I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but they're not showing up here.
Yeah, I don't see any questions on my side either.
No. So, but they normally do. So maybe this is not set up for that. So to end, let's just say, how are you coping in this craziness world that we've been living in? The COVID, surviving Trump. If we did survive him, I don't know. He's still out there in the. I mean,
I don't know that we have survived Donald Trump. I think for me. I've had to take some time just to kind of deal with my own mental health, my own self-care, and sort of unplug a little bit from social media. There's just so much stuff that's out there that can have an impact on you, and you're not even realizing it. So, I just try and, do the best that I can to eat well, to exercise, take care of myself, to get away, to do things that are not so intense, because I tend to be a very intense kind of a person. And, I think the last 4 years really took a lot out of me emotionally, based on, 4 years of, Trump and the Trump era. And, really feeling as if this country really showed its hand in terms of who it really is, with regard to Black people and other marginalized groups, women, of course, definitely women. So, it has been a challenging, 4 years from a political standpoint. And then COVID has also been very difficult, just sort of navigating, being in this space, in this world, and not come down with an illness that's going to kill you. So just really just doing the best that I can to just take care of myself emotionally and my family as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best, Byron. Let's not make it months till we speak to each other again. Let's stay in touch. Thank you so much for doing this for Culture Reframed. It's just wonderful to have you as a guest.
Anytime.
Yeah. Oh, well, then I'll hold you to that, Byron.
Okay. All right. Anytime.
What you wish for, okay? Because we definitely would. And again, it's a pleasure to see you. And to everybody out there, I'm sorry we can't see your questions. We would have loved to answer some. And remember our conference on sex education with a porn critical lens, October the 2nd and 3rd. Go on there on culturereframed.org, and you can you'll see the program, and also you'll be able to register. Just go to website events and click on conference. And this will be on our Facebook page tomorrow, so you can send it around to your friends. And again, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Byron, again. And
thank you very much, Gail.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.